As always, guys, 8 high upside players that I'm bringing you that you can plug and play into your lineup going into week 11 of the fantasy football season. We do have 4 teams on a bye: the Falcons, the Colts, the Patriots, and the Saints. Not that big of a dent as we've seen so far in previous weeks, but Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Ramondre Stevenson. Not that big of a dent, but enough to hurt your lineup going into this week. So stay tuned for my 8 high upside players. Starting off at the running back position with my first high upside player, going to the Washington Commanders, and that is Brian Robinson here. And we saw what he did this past week. Only had 8 carries on the ground, but where he excelled was in the air. Caught 6 out of 6, nearly 120 yards, a touchdown, over 27 fantasy points, and he was playing the Seattle Seahawks, who gave up a lot of points to the running back position. Now he's playing my beloved New York Giants, a divisional game at home as well for the Washington Commanders, and we all know how bad this team is. Specifically my Giants, right? This team is tanking. This team has been struggling, and what we saw, that this team can't score. So my expectation for this game is that this team should be leading. The Washington Commanders should be leading against the Giants early and often, and should result into running of the ball, right? Not only that, Antonio Gibson is going to be injured, or technically right now is questionable, very doubtful for this game, which means Brian Robinson could be seeing the majority of the workload. Not saying Chris Rodriguez is going to be irrelevant, just saying that they should be leaning on Brian Robinson a little bit more coming into this week against my Giants. Once again, over 27 fantasy points this past week. Somebody, if you are struggling, if you don't have an Alvin Kamara, maybe you don't have a Ramondre Stevenson, a Jonathan Taylor, or Bijan Robinson, Brian Robinson is somebody that you can plug and play going into week 11. My second high upside player, still staying at the running back position, we're going with Darrell Henderson, and I would also put Royce Freeman in this category depending on how deep your league is. But someone for me is Darrell Henderson. He is playing the Seattle Seahawks. He is coming off a bye week here with the Los Angeles Rams. Not only that, Kyren Williams is still not back from that injury. He is projected to come back in week 12. So you do have one more week with Darrell Henderson and or Royce Freeman here. One of the biggest caveats in this matchup is that he's playing the Seattle Seahawks, who currently give up the 4th most fantasy points to the running back position. And oddly enough, the person that I just brought you, and Brian Robinson, you saw over 27 fantasy points for Brian Robinson at the running back position. Not saying that Darrell Henderson and or Royce Freeman is going to have that type of upside, but if you are once again struggling with injuries at the running back position, maybe you have a Kyren Williams that you're still waiting on, maybe you have an Alvin Kamara or Bijan Robinson or Jonathan Taylor that are on a bye week, Darrell Henderson could be a good plug and play here, hoping that he finds the end zone. I'm not expecting 25 plus touches. I'm expecting more 10 to 12, maybe split with Royce Freeman, and maybe Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman find the end zone coming into this week. And why is that? Because Matthew Stafford is back. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford, they're going to be moving the ball down the field. And once they get into that red zone area, there's no question in my mind that Darrell Henderson is going to be finding the end zone. They're playing at home at SoFi Stadium, so this is a good matchup that I expect not only to be a high-scoring game, but a game that easily you can see, once again, Darrell Henderson finding the end zone. One more time, the Seattle Seahawks give up the 4th most fantasy points to the running back position. He is somebody you can plug and play going into week 11 that has high upside. All right, my third high upside player coming into this week, somebody I have been a little bit on a roller coaster this week, if you've been with me through our live streams, and that is Devin Singletary. And look, he did phenomenal this past week against the Cincinnati Bengals. A career touches with 30 attempts on the ground, 150 yards, and a touchdown, over 23 fantasy points. That was amazing. I am not discrediting him. I am not taking that away from him. What he did was great. I think the expectation for a lot of people after this past week are hoping that he is going to get the similar type of workload. Maybe not the touches, but hoping for the same fantasy outcome. Now, 23 fantasy points is not something that I am expecting for Devin Singletary. And this is why he is on my high upside player, a high upside list, right? Because my expectation with Devin Singletary, the way he has been performing, hasn't been great. 1 fantasy point, 3 fantasy points, right? 7 fantasy points. He even had 0 fantasy points, 1, 6, 4. Then he has 10. I think that's where that range is. I am hoping for 10 to about 13 fantasy points, and that is still a high upside play for Devin Singletary. Now, there's 2 big caveats in here, is that he is playing the Arizona Cardinals, who currently give up the 3rd most points to the running back position. The expectation now is a little bit different because my second caveat is that Kyler Murray is back. Before, if you thought that this was Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune, you can see this offense running the ball as much as possible because of how bad this run defense is. Now it's a little bit different. This coming into this week, one of the highest over-unders is this game, the Cardinals versus the Texans. That, to me, indicates that they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more than running the ball. Okay, so that's why I think we need to lower our expectations, literally cut those touches that Devin Singletary got in half. Same with the fantasy points. So my expectations maybe 12 to 15 touches and hopefully 10 to 13 fantasy points. And that's exactly the range that I'm hoping for Devin Singletary. And that is a high upside play, depending on your week, depending on if you have players on a bye week, depending on if you have injuries. It just all depends on your situation. This is why he's on this list. Now, if he supersedes that, maybe he does have another 30 plus touch game or over 23 fantasy points. That's amazing. That's 100% amazing, but you need to lower your expectations with the type of upside you are expecting Devin Singletary to have coming into week 11. So keep that in mind. Devin Singletary, my 3rd high upside player. Okay, my next high upside player going into week 11 is Ty Chandler. Yes, I also have Alexander Madison on here as well, as you can see. Now, keep in mind, if Alexander Madison does not play, obviously, you're going to be starting Ty Chandler. Now, vice versa, if Alexander Madison is cleared off concussion, I am starting him with confidence over Ty Chandler. Both of these guys has great high upside plays coming into this week. Why? Because they are playing the Denver Broncos, who currently give up the most points to the running back position. Now, we saw what Ty did this past week in week 10 against New Orleans Saints when Alexander Madison went down, 15 carries, 43 yards. He scored a touchdown, over 10 fantasy points. He had the juice. It was a little bit more exciting when you saw Ty Chandler, a little bit more explosive when you saw Ty Chandler. Now, he didn't get any opportunities in the air, which is a little bit different, but that is something that I'm hoping and expecting that he can get into coming into this week versus the Denver Broncos. Mind you, this is a Sunday night game as well, a primetime game where he can be under the lights and have a good opportunity to shine. Now, with Ty Chandler, you start him if Alexander Madison doesn't start. Now, with Alexander Madison, you start him as well because, once again, of the opportunity that he has with the Denver Broncos, once again, who currently give up the most points to the running back position. Oddly enough, the Minnesota Vikings still can make the playoffs. Genuinely, they can make the playoffs if Josh Dobbs continues to ball and does his thing. And I do see this team moving the ball down the field. And yes, the Denver Broncos are kind of to find their rhythm here, but so are the Minnesota Vikings with Josh Dobbs. So keep that in mind. Ty Chandler, you should start if Alexander Madison doesn't play, and then vice versa, you start Alexander Madison if he plays and sit Ty Chandler. Okay, my next high upside player, and I'm really excited and nervous about this one because this one is specifically for deeper leagues. Any leagues that are bigger than 12, I would recommend you starting him. Anyone that plays in a 12-man league or lower, I highly don't recommend, and I think that could be a really big risk. But I do want to bring some context and why I feel really confident and excited about starting someone like this if I'm in a 14, 16, or even bigger man league. Okay, hear me out. That is Jerick McKinnon. Now, the context that I'm bringing here may be a lot of feelers and not really stats to kind of back it up, but hear me out. When you think of this offense, this matchup, the Super Bowl matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Kansas City Chiefs, mind you, they are playing in Kansas City. This Eagles defense, who currently give up the least amount of fantasy points to the running back position, I don't expect this game to be a heavy hitting running back lead game either. I don't expect either teams to give the ball to their running backs more than 15 times this game. This is going to be a shootout. And what happens for the Kansas City Chiefs specifically, when it is a shootout, they kind of vert to Jerick McKinnon. Now, when you think of the context of when a team is struggling or when they're going back and forth in a high shootout game, you think of what happens. For a good example, the Denver Broncos in Week 8 versus the Kansas City Chiefs, where they struggled to move the ball and run the ball with Isaiah Pacheco. What did they do? They reverted to a more pass-heavy offense. Now, was Jerick McKinnon involved in that? Absolutely not. They just struggled to move the ball. You think of it the same thing against Miami. What happens against Miami with Isaiah Pacheco? He struggles to run the ball as well, only 16 carries. The second half of the game, they kind of get away with it. I agree. But you also see the utilization in the early struggling parts of the game versus the Miami Dolphins of Jerick McKinnon getting usage. And he does pass a catch or catch a pass, and he finds the end zone, and he has over 10 fantasy points. Now, when you think of this front four for the Philadelphia Eagles and what they can do against Isaiah Pacheco, that's a little bit different, and this is why I lean in a Jerick McKinnon who is going to be utilized in space, who is going to be utilized in screens, who's going to be utilized in dump-off passes, in Texas routes. He's going to be even lining up on the outside. That is my expectations, and my expectations for Jerick McKinnon is if he finds the end zone with 3 touches, that is a high upside play. And this is why when I think of a 12-man league or specifically bigger than a 12-man league, this is why Jerick McKinnon is a high upside play. This is purely for fun. Okay, so once again, keep in mind I might get roasted, but that's okay. Let's have fun. Fantasy football is fun right now, and this is exactly why I wanted to bring Jerick McKinnon, because against the Philadelphia Eagles, who give up the least amount of points to the running back position, I don't expect Isaiah Pacheco to be toking the ball over 15 times coming into this game. If he does, I'd be really surprised. And if he does, he's probably going to be averaging less than 4 yards per carry. So keep that in mind. Jerick McKinnon, high upside play for bigger leagues going into Week 11. All right, going into my wide receiver high upside player, my beloved Quinton Johnson. Yes, Quinton Johnson is a great high upside play coming into this week. We saw what he did against the Detroit Lions in that shootout, called 4 out of 4 and a touchdown, over 13 fantasy points, had his highest snap percentages coming into, well, in Week 10. Now we go into Week 11, where Keenan Allen does have a shoulder injury and he is trending on the right direction to play. I am not saying that they're going to be limiting Keenan Allen, but what I am going to say is that I will not be surprised if Keenan Allen in this game specifically re-aggravates his shoulder, which means they would have to maybe rely on a little bit of an Austin Eckler, maybe have to rely on a little bit on Quinton Johnson. Not only that, Gerald Everett is also questionable for this game. If I'm not mistaken, as I'm recording this, he's already been ruled out. Yes, he's been ruled out for Week 11, so they're limited on weapons as well. So that means Quinton Johnson, finally, you're going to potentially see if Keenan Allen does re-aggravate that shoulder, might leaning on Quinton Johnson a little bit more coming into this week. So if you need a good flex option, maybe you had a Michael Pittman or Josh Downs or a Pop Douglas or Chris Olave or Drake London, and you need a good high upside play hoping for him to score over 10 fantasy points, that is Quinton Johnson going into Week 11. All right, my next high upside player coming into this week, going to the Seattle Seahawks, and that is Jackson Smith-Njigba, another rookie coming in on the high upside play, and that's exactly what you want to hear, because you think that these guys are going to get production, and I believe it. So talk it up. Jackson Smith-Njigba, somebody that I'm really excited about coming into this week, and that's honestly purely because of Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett coming into this week is genuinely a purely questionable player. We just don't know if he's going to be ready. He has been suffering with that hamstring injury, and when you think of somebody that's older in Tyler Lockett that is 31, those hamstring injuries linger just a little bit. And we have been seeing Jackson Smith-Njigba getting a little bit more and more work, and especially after the bye week here, 8 fantasy points, 16 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, and 9 fantasy points there. So he has been getting the work, getting a little bit more involved. And when Tyler Lockett is out, which we have seen Tyler Lockett and or DK out of this year so far, specifically in Week 7 against the Arizona Cardinals, that's when Jackson Smith-Njigba had his highest fantasy outing. And once again, Week 7, caught 4 out of 7 targets or 63 yards and a touchdown. He had over 16 fantasy points. Now you take Tyler Lockett potentially out of this game. Jackson Smith-Njigba could be somebody that you can plug in your flex with confidence coming into this week. That could have a high upside play. So once again, start Tyler Lockett with some confidence going into week 11. All right, and my last high upside player going into week 11, I'm bringing you 2 on the same team, and that is Jaylen Reed and Romeo Doubs. That is right, guys. If you do need a high upside play, both of these guys could be plugged and play coming into this week. We have seen Christian Watson just be completely irrelevant, and not irrelevant. I just think that they're utilizing him in the wrong way. They're doing a lot of deep ball passes, nothing short, nothing sweet, nothing in the middle of the field. And if it is in the middle of the field, he is dropping the ball. Catch the ball. But Jaylen Reed and Romeo Doubs is somebody that we have been seeing really shine in the past 4 weeks after the bye week here. Both of these guys have scored a double-digit fantasy points out of the three out of the last 4 games. You see Jaylen Reed, 11 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, 7 fantasy points, and then 18. And then Romeo, 11, 6, and 12. You see these high upside for these guys, high upside plays at your flex position. And that's exactly what you want to see here, specifically against the Los Angeles Chargers, who currently give up the 7th most points to the running back position. And if you need a high upside play with a team, in my perspective, that's going to be playing from behind, Jaylen Reed and Romeo Doubs are somebody that you can plug and play coming into this week. Once again, guys, Brian Robinson, Darrell Henderson, Devin Singletary, Jerick McKinnon, Ty Chandler, or Alexander Madison, Quinton Johnson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then the Green Bay Packers at the Romeo Doubs and Jaylen Reeds. Those are my high upside players coming into week 11 of the fantasy football season. Guys, we're almost to the playoffs. I wish you the best of luck. I'm genuinely trying to bring you something that I would do, genuinely, if I just need to just take a whim and I say, you know what, I need to make it to the playoffs and do the best that I possibly can. These are the guys I truly would be starting and considering starting depending on my situation. So good luck going into week 11. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.